I never imagined a simple family gathering at 43 would tilt my neatly ordered world. My name is Laura. For 16 years I've shared life with my husband Greg. We have no children, but our careers are fulfilling, and our days comfortable, perhaps too comfortable. Routine had settled over us like a warm quilt, and I rarely questioned it, until the night everything shifted. On a mild Saturday evening my sister-in-law, Monica, hosted a dinner for her eldest, Jake, who'd just turned 23. Jake is bright, thoughtful, and carries himself with a maturity that often surprises older relatives. I've always felt a soft spot for him. In the absence of children of my own he somehow filled that space. The table overflowed with laughter, roast vegetables, fresh bread, and perhaps too much wine. Greg, good-natured and relaxed, enjoyed more than a few glasses, and by the time dessert ended his eyelids drooped like wilting petals. "Could you help me to the car?" he whispered. Before I answered, Jake appeared at my elbow. "I'll walk you both out, Aunt Laura." His tone held only kindness. Together we guided Greg into the back seat. Within minutes his gentle snores blended with the engine's hum. During the 25-minute drive, Jake spoke about graduate school applications, city planning, and dreams of designing spaces that nurture community. Pride welled inside me, pride for him, and pride that our family could nurture such purpose. At home we settled Greg into bed. Jake lingered in the hallway, respectful of the private moment. When I emerged, he offered me a glass of water. Something weighed on him. I saw it in the tight set of his shoulders. "Aunt Laura, can we talk?" "Of course." We moved to the kitchen, the house silent but for the ticking clock. He ran a hand through his hair, an old nervous habit, and began. "I've been struggling with feelings that don't make sense." He spoke of admiration that had grown into affection for someone older, someone who, he feared, could never return it. I listened, thinking he meant a professor or colleague. Then his words landed with the force of a sudden storm. I was the person he admired. My breath caught. For a heartbeat the room felt weightless. "Ethan, that's what Monica called him when he was little. You know I love you dearly, but not in that way. I'm your aunt and I'm married to your uncle." The age gap alone. "I know," he said quickly, pain flashing across his face. "I tried dating, tried forgetting, but nothing worked. I had to be honest before the feelings twisted into something worse. Respect, honesty, affection, all these shone from him, yet they sparked a danger we both recognized. Boundaries mattered. Family mattered. I thanked him for trusting me, but laid the line as gently as I could. These feelings can't guide our actions. We protect the people we love by guarding the lines that keep us all whole." Relief and sadness mingled in his eyes. He nodded, whispered goodnight, and left into the dark. Sleep came fitfully. Memories replayed, the softness in his voice, the fierce integrity in his confession, the shock in my own heart. By morning I resolved two things: Greg would hear nothing unnecessary, and Jake's confidence would remain safe with me. Days turned into weeks. At gatherings Jake stayed polite, a step farther than before, yet his gaze sometimes lingered with unspoken questions. I answered with steady calm, modeling the boundaries we'd agreed on. Inside, though, I wrestled with guilt. Greg's casual affection, an arm around my shoulder, a grin over morning coffee, now pierced me with twofold weight: gratitude for his trust and fear of betraying it even in thought. I began noticing every choice: where I sat at the dinner table, how long I held a hug, whether my laughter rang too brightly when Jake told a joke. The self-scrutiny was exhausting but necessary. One afternoon, tension with Greg over a trivial chore left me drained. I wandered to the kitchen for tea, and there was Jake, pouring water into a kettle. The air felt thick with everything unspoken. He saw my red eyes and offered only 4 words. "I'm here to listen." Simple, sincere, and healing. We spoke, not of forbidden feelings but of stress, marriage, and the courage it takes to keep promises. He never crossed the line again, and in that restraint I saw genuine maturity. I, too, learned. Love is not always a matter of romance. Sometimes it is the discipline of guarding another person's dignity, even from one's own longing. Sometimes it is the humility to admit that boundaries protect more than they restrict. They preserve the very relationships we cherish. Months have passed. Greg and I, stirred by that season of quiet re-evaluation, decided to volunteer together at a youth architectural camp, the kind Jake once attended. Serving side by side renewed our partnership in ways dinners and holidays never had. Jake, meanwhile, moved to a new city for graduate studies. Before leaving, he hugged me and said, "Thank you for showing me how to value feelings without letting them rule me. That lesson will shape every relationship I build." I watched him drive away, hope and bittersweet pride swirling within. The night of the birthday supper had brought discomfort, but also clarity. Honesty must be wedded to responsibility, affection to wisdom. I still replay that conversation in the kitchen, but now it teaches rather than haunts. It reminds me that 1. Boundaries are acts of care. They guard hearts, our own and others. 2. Honesty needs timing and empathy. Truth spoken with respect can prevent deeper hurt. 3. Relationships evolve. Love may shift form, from playful aunt-nephew closeness to respectful adult friendship, and that shift can be beautiful. 4. Self-reflection is lifelong. Even in midlife we meet moments that test our principles and call us to grow. Greg and I continue our steady life, more mindful, more grateful. Jake sends postcards of city skylines he hopes to transform. Monica, unaware of the storm that never broke, marvels at her son's new confidence. As for me, I've learned that the heart can hold many kinds of love, but wisdom chooses which ones to feed. And sometimes the bravest, most loving answer is a gentle no, spoken for the sake of everyone's tomorrow. Late autumn brought a chill sharper than usual. Greg and I were packing donated drafting tools for the camp when he paused, pressed a hand to his chest, and swayed. My mug shattered on the concrete as I lunged toward him. The ambulance lights that followed painted our living room walls in frantic red. Hours later, a cardiologist explained that Greg's arteries were whispering warnings, nothing fatal yet, but a stern demand for change. That night in the hospital I held his still warm hand, and felt the thinness of life. All the secret worries I had carried. The private storm with Jake, the quiet guilt, were dwarfed by a fiercer fear. What if I lost Greg before I had truly shown him the depth of my gratitude? I pressed my forehead to the blanket and prayed, clumsy, desperate words, but they steadied me. When Greg squeezed my fingers weakly, relief flooded my chest like spring thaw. While Greg recovered, Jake wrote from the city. His letters arrived on thick cream paper, sketched with pencil margins, bridges, park pavilions, open plazas alive with trees. Dear Aunt Laura. Our professor asked what human-centered design means. I told him it's the architecture of kindness, spaces that keep people honest and close, the way you kept me honest that night in your kitchen. His words felt like balm. I told Greg about the letters, leaving out the deeper history, but sharing enough for pride to light his tired eyes. That kid will build beautiful things, he murmured, and I silently agreed. Weeks of rehab blurred into routine. One evening, sorting medical papers, I found a small envelope addressed in my own handwriting, a note I had drafted to Greg months earlier, when guilt weighed heaviest, but never mailed. Palms sweating, I slid the page free. I nearly stumbled, Greg. Nothing happened, but the almost happened, and it shook me. I chose us, yet I'm ashamed I had to choose at all. My heart pounded. The truth was raw, but the time for secrecy had passed. That night, after dinner of heart-safe vegetables and laughter that sounded thin, I laid the envelope beside Greg's tea. He read silently. The room hummed with the refrigerator's low drone. At last he looked up, neither anger nor hurt in his eyes, only ache. I wish, he began, voice rough, you'd carried this burden with me earlier. Tears spilled before I could stop them. I was afraid you'd doubt the love that is real because of a feeling that wasn't meant to be. Greg opened his arms. Fear builds higher walls than truth ever could. We held each other, the loose ends of our story finally weaving into shared cloth. In that embrace I felt something mend, not only between us but within me. Spring returned, and with it the youth camp. Greg, sturdier now, taught students how sunlight angles change with seasons. I guided them in weaving gardens around their models. On closing day we video called Jake so he could critique final projects. The screen filled with his easy grin. He praised a timid 12-year-old's cardboard amphitheater until her face glowed brighter than her model's paper lanterns. Watching him, I realized the chapter of hush-hush sorrow had matured into a quieter, nobler bond, mentor and mentee, fellow guardians of futures larger than our own. Jake's graduation coincided with Greg's medical clearance. We traveled to the city for the ceremony, a skyline of cranes and fresh glass reflecting morning gold. That evening Jake led us to his favorite rooftop garden, a project he had helped design. Planters overflowed with lavender, pathways glowed with embedded lights. Above, the sky blushed violet. He handed Greg a folded drawing, the garden's blueprint, signed for Uncle Greg, who reminds me every structure needs a sound heart. Then he turned to me. For a moment the past flickered in his eyes, but only as a distant echo. "You taught me limits can be lighthouses," he said softly. "They don't just warn, they guide." Emotion tightened my throat. "And you taught me honesty can grow into something stronger than regret," I replied. We stood together at the railing, Greg, his arm around my waist, Jake, tall and hopeful, while city lights blossomed below like silent fireworks. Life didn't become flawless after that. Greg still coaxes me to take evening walks when I'd rather collapse on the couch, and I still remind him to skip the salted fries. Letters still crisscross between our home and Jake's new firm, filled with sketches and recipe swaps and the occasional goofy self-portrait. But beneath the ordinary hum there's a sturdier foundation, the knowledge that we faced temptation, illness, and fear, and answered each with truth, boundaries, and a determination to choose one another, again and again. When I teach campers now, I tell them architecture isn't only steel and stone, it's every decision that holds a life upright. Walls, doors, windows, each is a promise about how we'll treat those inside and those outside. So is marriage. So is friendship. So is the quiet courage of a young man who spoke inconvenient truth, and an older woman who remembered which doors must remain closed. Sometimes, on still nights, I step into our yard and look up at the stars. I picture Jake somewhere under the same sky, sketching a playground or hospice garden, and Greg asleep inside, heart beating its steady renewed rhythm. And I whisper thanks for a birthday supper that shook my world, because in the tremor I learned how love, guided by wisdom, can rebuild stronger than before. At 43 I believed my life was solidly built, brick by brick days with neat edges and no surprises. I'm Laura, urban planner by trade, list maker by instinct, married to gentle, easygoing Greg for 16 mostly comfortable years. We never had children, instead we poured our spare love into nieces and nephews, especially Jake, my sister-in-law Monica's eldest. On a soft April Saturday Monica hosted Jake's 23rd birthday dinner. The house smelled of rosemary roast and cinnamon cake, laughter ping-ponged across the table. Greg enjoyed a little too much Merlot, and by 10 o'clock his eyelids sank like sunsetting shades. "Aunt Laura, let me help," Jake offered, steadying Greg's arm. In the car Greg drifted into snores while Jake and I talked about his graduate school dream, designing public spaces that invite strangers to become neighbors. Pride swelled in me. When we finally tucked Greg into our guest room, Jake lingered in the hallway. I thanked him, expecting him to head home, but he cleared his throat, an audible knot of nerves. "Could we talk in the kitchen?" Under the tremble of a single pendant lamp, Jake's hands fidgeted around a water glass. "I've tried to ignore this, but honesty seems kinder than silence," he began, voice tight. "I've developed feelings for someone far older, someone off-limits. That someone is you." Air rushed out of my lungs. In 20 seconds the axis of aunt and nephew spun wildly off course. "Jake, I love you dearly, but as family. I'm your aunt. I'm married to Greg. The gap between what you feel and what we must live is. I know every obstacle," he cut in, despairing but resolute. I needed you to hear the truth before it warped into resentment or secrecy. I steadied my tone, building a boundary that felt as vital as a levee before a flood. Thank you for trusting me. Now we protect each other by honoring those obstacles. Affection is powerful, but guardrails are too. Relief and sorrow mingled in his eyes. He nodded, pressed a respectful kiss to my knuckles, and slipped into the night, headlights dissolving down the street. Sleep was a stranger that night, guilt and worry argued till dawn. Days turned to weeks. At family gatherings Jake kept cordial distance, yet sometimes his glance brushed mine with questions that burned and chilled at once. I matched each look with calm steadiness, determined that my silence would not invite misinterpretation. Inside, though, I deconstructed every gesture I made, a laugh too bright, a hand on his shoulder too long, each felt like teetering on a narrow beam above waves of consequence. Greg sensed only that I seemed distracted. I deflected, blaming work deadlines. The half-truth lodged like grit in both our throats. That autumn Greg and I volunteered to pack donated drafting kits for a youth architecture camp. In the garage he suddenly paled and sank against a shelf, pressing a hand to his chest. Paramedics arrived in scarlet flash. At the hospital a cardiologist explained that 2 arteries were partially blocked, a stent and a lifestyle overhaul could prevent disaster, if we listened. Fear rewired my priorities overnight. The secret storm with Jake shrank beside the possibility of losing Greg before I'd even told him how fiercely I cherished our ordinary mornings. During his recovery I read aloud, kept watch over sodium counts, and learned how to speak gratitude without waiting for special occasions. Meanwhile Jake, now in another state for graduate school, began mailing cream paper letters ringed with pencil sketches, bridges arcing toward one another, plazas shaped like open arms. Dear Aunt Laura. We studied humane urbanism. I said it's the art of building kindness into concrete. You modeled that for me, drawing a line that protected us both when my feelings blurred. His candor soothed old fears. I shared the letter's lighter parts with Greg, proud of Jake's growth, omitting the early turbulence. Greg's eyes, still ringed in hospital gray, brightened. One rainy evening as Greg napped, I sorted paperwork and found an unmailed envelope addressed to him in my own hand, written months earlier after Jake's confession, then hidden. Inside, my raw admission that temptation had brushed our marriage, that I had chosen loyalty but carried shame for letting the choice ever be necessary. I weighed the paper's slim heft against the heavier cost of silence. When Greg woke for evening tea, I slid the note across the quilt. He read slowly. The room thrummed with the forepump of memory, thunder rolled outside. At last he spoke, voice low but steady. I wish we'd faced this earlier, together. Tears blurred his outline. I was terrified the truth would wound you. Fear builds higher walls than any truth could, he murmured, pulling me close. In that embrace pieces hidden and jagged clicked into place. Spring returned carrying green shoots and second chances. Greg, cleared by doctors, co-taught at the architecture camp, lecturing on light angles with a stent's gentle reminder ticking in his pulse. I guided students in weaving pocket gardens around their models. On presentation day we video called Jake. His generous critiques ignited shy students. Watching him, I realized aunt-nephew had transformed into something sturdier, mentoring allies, co-architects of futures larger than our own dilemmas. We traveled to Jake's graduation. That evening he led us to a rooftop garden he'd helped design. Planters of lavender softened concrete, path lights glowed like captured stars. He handed Greg a framed blueprint, for Uncle Greg, proof every strong structure needs a sound heart. Then he turned to me. You taught me that limits can be lighthouses, they don't just warn, they guide. Emotion tightened my throat. And you taught me honesty can mature into something stronger than regret. We leaned against the rail, city lights blooming below, 3 lives once shaken now aligned like beams supporting a single roof. Life resumed its humble pattern, Greg's diet logs, my planner margins, Jake's postcards from new project sites, each a pledge that the quake of one April night had birthed sturdier foundations, not ruins. Occasionally, memory drifts back to that kitchen confession. Instead of dread, I feel grateful for its unasked lessons. 1. Boundaries are not barriers, they're load-bearing beams. 2. Truth voiced early costs less than secrets stored late. 3. Love is architecture, shaped daily by choices that decide who feels safe inside our walls. The youth camp now ends with a tradition. Students walk their models past a torch that symbolizes the sun. I ask them 3 questions. Whom will this space protect? What lines must remain unbroken? How will daylight, literal or moral, enter every corner? I share a pared-down version of my own story. How a family dinner jolted hidden emotions, how honesty plus restraint saved relationships, how health scares recalibrate priorities, and how compassion can retrofit even shaky structures. Then I tell them the simplest truth architecture and life ever teaches: strength isn't the absence of stress, it's the capacity to bear weight without breaking the people inside. They nod, absorbing both engineering and ethic. And I remember the night our family home felt like it might crack, and how we shored it up with candor, courage, and a promise to keep rebuilding. On quiet nights I step outside, breathe the scent of Greg's herb garden, and trace constellations Jake once sketched. Somewhere under the same stars he drafts plazas where strangers will greet each other by name. Somewhere in our bedroom Greg's heartbeat keeps patient time. I whisper thanks for the supper that rattled my walls. Because the tremor revealed which beams were weak and which virtues, once reinforced, could hold the roof of our lives for many seasons more. Thank you so much for watching interesting stories of Moody Tales. Kindly like, subscribe, and share to get more interesting stories that's much better than this. Best wishes from here. Thank you so much for watching interesting stories of Moody Tales. Kindly like, subscribe, and share to get more interesting stories that's much better than this. Best wishes from here.